Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. I hope you guys are all having a wonderful Monday. Today we're going to be talking about how you can determine whether or not your crested gecko is a Lilly White or not. This is an updated video to one I made about 2 years ago talking about the same thing. I have some new tips and tricks that you can use to determine whether or not a crested gecko is a Lilly White or not. And then later in this video I'm going to show you a gecko and we're going to go through the steps step by step and see whether or not we can determine a crested gecko is a Lilly White or if it's not. So to recap that video I made about 2 years ago, there was 5 things in that video I said that you could use to determine whether or not a crested gecko was a Lilly White or not. And so in this video, you're going to hear me referring to a normal crested gecko. And what I mean by that is we're going to be comparing a Lilly White to one of my regular non-Lilly Whites that's a high white animal that you might get confused with and think it is a Lilly White. So when I say normal crested gecko, I'm really talking about my non-Lilly White, high white gecko, right? So the number one thing you can look for to determine whether or not a crested gecko even has a chance or not is at the parents. One has to be a Lilly White and one has to be a normal crested gecko for it to be a Lilly White. If you have 2 normal crested geckos, you have 0 chance because there is no hets, there's no recessive genes with Lilly Whites, it's co-dominant, so it should be 50-50 when it comes to having one Lilly White parent and one normal. Obviously, if you don't have parent info, this doesn't apply, but the next easiest way is by the side scales. The side scales on a Lilly White will look like this. They'll have very thick, raised scales. They may be white, cream, or yellow in color, or even now there's some orange in color. However, they're going to look very thick and like there's almost extra scales. Versus a normal crested gecko like this, that's a high white animal. You can see it's white, but it's not thick. It just looks like normal scales. So that's a very easy determining way. Now, obviously, this only applies if you have enough scales to look at. And like you'll see later in this video, can be a good thing and a bad thing to determine whether or not you have a Lilly White. The next thing you can look for is at their tail. The majority of Lilly Whites will have a very white tail with not a lot of pattern. Not all of them will. Some of them will look like a normal crested gecko tail. Like you can see here, here's a normal crested gecko tail, and then my Lilly White tail. Much wider, a lot less pattern on it. This isn't a foolproof one, but it can be a sign that you have a Lilly White. Our third sign is the belly. Again, this isn't one that's always foolproof, but the majority of Lilly Whites will have some sort of cream pattern on their belly going up to their sides where their pattern will meet. However, looking at my normal crested gecko here, you can see that this one has a lot of pattern on the belly and it is white too. So this could be another one that's kind of hard to tell, just like the tail. They might have it, they might not, but it does make a sign of a Lilly White. Now, one of the new things I wanted to add is head and dorsal pattern. If you go on MorphMarket and you look at Lilly Whites, you'll notice that a lot of them have little to no head pattern and very little dorsal pattern. This is something that I've noticed over the years working with Lilly Whites. Again, not always the case, but the majority of them will have almost no head pattern and only little splotches on their dorsal. And I can show you on some of my Lilly Whites like this, you can see very little pattern. I mean, there's a little bit there, but not a whole lot. Versus on my normal crested gecko where it's got kind of almost like the bars going across or more bands of pattern in there. And especially if they have base pattern coming through on their head, that's usually a good sign that it's not a Lilly White. Just go on MorphMarket, look through the Lilly Whites. You'll kind of determine some of their traits and you'll see like a lot of them have no head pattern, like I'm saying. And the last but not least, again, another one that's not foolproof, but I've noticed that a lot of Lilly Whites, this is easier to tell on baby Lilly Whites, they have what I like to call white knuckles. If you look at their feet, there'll be like a ring right where their toes start and it'll be pure white, just like their pattern is. This is something that can happen on normal crested geckos too, but on Lilly Whites it seems very prevalent where they get this thick band of white on the back feet and a little bit thinner band on the front feet. Again, not all of them have this, and obviously as they get lower and lower expression, the chances of this happening is less and less. And unfortunately, that's one of the things of the world we live in. As more people get Lilly Whites and more people breed them, they're going to get lower and lower expression ones that pop out. They're going to have to obviously sell them too, and you may end up with one of them. And so it's just a fact of life. And I'm not discouraging anyone from breeding Lilly Whites. I'm just saying that's something that's going to happen in the future, and it's already happening today. And last but not least, the thing that I talked about you could do to determine if you have a Lilly White or not is obviously simply breed it out. If you breed a gecko and it comes out with 50% Lilly Whites and 50% normal geckos, there's a good chance you have a Lilly White. Versus if you breed your gecko out and it turns out with all normal babies, well then there you go. Now you know you don't have a Lilly White. Obviously that's the most time consuming and longest route, and usually you don't need to do that for 99% of geckos. So now that we have all the telltale signs of what makes a Lilly White, let's talk about this gecko that a viewer recently sent me. He did give me permission to use his photos in this video, and I thought it'd make a good talking point. So let's go over it and see if we can determine whether or not this is a Lilly White or not. So this is a gecko that he purchased recently. The parents, there was one Lilly White and one normal, so that's a good sign because we know that there's a possibility that it can be a Lilly White then, versus if it had two normal parents, we would say, no way there's a Lilly White in there. It just can't be. There's no het or recessive Lilly Whites. So it does have one Lilly White parent, so that's a good sign. But now let's take a look at the side scales here on this gecko. You can see that there is very little pattern, but you can see that the little white pattern that there is raised up. It does look like it has some raised scales, and like I said earlier, that is a sign of it being a Lilly White. So for the side scales, we'll mark it down that, it does look like a Lilly White side scale pattern would have, even though there is not a lot of it. Next up, let's talk about the tail. The tail looks like a normal crested gecko. You can see that there is white on the top, but there is a lot of pattern underneath, more similar to a normal crested gecko. Like I said earlier though, this isn't always a telltale sign. Some lilies will have just a normal looking tail. But since it has a normal looking tail, we're just going to cross this one out and mark it as an unconclusive answer. Next up, we got the belly. He was kind enough to send belly photos, and you can see here with the flash on that it does have a nice cream color on its belly, and it kind of has the same pattern color on the sides, and that is a telltale sign of a Lilly White. So as far as the belly goes, I would mark this down that it does look like a Lilly White. So far we got the side scales, looks like a Lilly White. The tail, too hard to tell. The belly looks like a Lilly White, definitely. Again, that's also something that can be seen in high white animals, but so far it looks like a Lilly White. Just a very low expression one. Now, the head and dorsal, this is where it threw me off. Because like I said, if you look at a lot of normal crested geckos, they're going to have a lot of pattern on their back and on their head versus Lilly Whites that'll have little to none. And by looking at this gecko, you can see there is a ton of pattern on the head and a good amount going down the dorsal. I personally have not seen any Lilly Whites with this amount of pattern on their head or dorsal. So that's where this really threw me off, because everything else checks out so far, but this really does not. And if you go on MorphMarket, like I said, and you look at the Lilly Whites, even the low expression ones, none of them have this much pattern on their head and dorsal. So that's one sign we're going to mark down as not a Lilly White. And then the white knuckles on this one, again, this is kind of like the tail. There's a little bit of pattern on the feet you can see, but it is not white like it would be on a Lilly White. So I'm going to have to mark this one down as kind of unconclusive because it's not always a sign, but it can be, and this one just isn't showing it. So the scales say it's a Lilly White. The tail is too hard to tell. The belly says it's a Lilly White. The parents, it has the possibility. The head and dorsal says no, it is not a Lilly White. And the knuckles is also too hard to tell. So what do you think I told this guy? Well, I had to tell him, it's too hard to tell, frankly. I would not be comfortable if this was my gecko selling it as a Lilly White, just because I think it's too hard to tell personally. You'll have to let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. From these pictures, would you say this is a Lilly White or it is not a Lilly White? I would lean to the side that it probably is, and it's just so low expression that the normal traits of the Lilly White are not showing through, because I think on most higher expression animals, it probably blocks out the pattern on the head and on the dorsal in some way, and maybe just because this one's so low expression, it is not doing that. But I'm really on the fence about this one. I can't tell. And I think that's pretty, something we haven't seen in the past, where geckos are this hard to tell if they're Lilly Whites or not. But you'll have to let me know. I'm really curious what you guys think. Lilly White, yes or no, down below in the comments. I told this person that it was not a Lilly White. But, looking again at the pictures, I would lean towards the side that it probably is, and it's just low expression. I think that's going to be my final take on this animal. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think. With that being said, I wanted to share with you one more thing that I thought was important, and is just my opinion. And I'm not dissing this guy's animal at all. This was a great example, and I appreciate him for letting me use his photos in this video. What I would like to say is just that if you're thinking about buying a Lilly White, I would maybe try and steer clear of getting the really low expression animals like this. Yes, they're going to be cheaper. Yes, you're going to have a Lilly White. However, the point of getting a Lilly White, at least in my head, is to get that nice, thick white pattern, that beautiful white animal. And, with this, yeah, you can say you own a Lilly White, I guess, but you're not getting the benefits of the Lilly White. And frankly, with the prices of Lilly Whites coming down, if you go on MorphMarket right now, you can pick up a very, very, very nice, higher white animal for less than $1,000 as a baby. And so that would be my recommendation to you. just because to reverse something that's so low expression, you're going to have to breed it 1 or 2 generations to some very high patterned animal to get that Lilly White gene to really kick back in. And so unless you're going to be doing some breeding, you're never going to see that high white pattern on your Lilly White. But that's just my take on it. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Hopefully this video helped you out. If there's any other questions you have about Lilly Whites or factors you think might make a Lilly White, please leave them down below to help other people. And with that being said, I hope to see you guys in my next video.